Have you ever felt like you were living in someone else's fairy tale, only to realize it was about to turn into a nightmare? I lived on my son's estate for 2 years, quietly priding myself on his success, until one chance encounter at the gates ripped the mask right off his face. It happened when I was coming home and heard a faint sobbing coming from the bushes near the service entrance. I shone my phone's flashlight toward the sound, and for the first time in my life, I truly broke down. That night, I made a choice that turned my son and me into enemies forever. But when you see your only heir set the dogs on the mother of his own sick child, you don't really have a choice at all. Hello to everyone listening. My name is Elijah Windcrest. I am 65 years old, and I never imagined I would have to tell a story this painful. I lived my whole life as an honest man, working hard at the local steel mill. I believed in people, and I always thought that integrity was something you passed down through your bloodline. How bitterly wrong I was. Please forgive me if my voice shakes. It is still hard for me to recall the details of that night. I want to tell you everything, straight from the heart, so you can understand why I did what I did, something many would call a betrayal of family. As I tell you this, I keep thinking that maybe you are listening from thousands of miles away in the silence of your own home. Please, let me know in the comments where you are from, what city or state you call home. It means a lot to me to know that there are people out there willing to share this heavy burden with me. Whether you are in a bustling city like Atlanta, a quiet town in North Carolina, or somewhere out in the Midwest. That evening started out like any other gray, dragging night until a single sound shattered my entire world. Suddenly, as I was walking past the thick lilac bushes near the back entrance of the estate, I heard a soft but unmistakable crying that sent a chill down my spine. At first, I thought it was a stray dog whining, but the intuition I developed over decades on the factory floor told me it was human. I pulled out my phone, clicked on the flashlight, and aimed the beam into the dark. There, sitting on the damp earth and shivering against the biting wind, was a young woman clutching a bulky bundle to her chest. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pure terror. I recognized her immediately. It was Serafina, the former housemaid who had vanished from the estate 2 years ago. She was only 20, just a girl really, but now her face looked gray and hollowed out, as if she had lived a whole lifetime in hell since I last saw her. I was about to ask what she was doing there, hiding like a thief, but she silently pulled back the edge of the wool blanket. Tucked deep inside was an infant. His tiny face looked so achingly familiar to me. It was like looking into a mirror and seeing myself 35 years ago. My heart stopped, and a lump formed in my throat when Serafina spoke the words that split my life into before and after. This is Arthur's son, Mr. Windcrest. He needs help. He's dying. I stood there looking at the trembling girl, my mind unable to process the weight of what she was saying. The wind was picking up, and keeping a young mother and a baby out in the cold was a crime. So, pushing aside my initial shock, I motioned for them to follow me. My home is a small guest cottage on the back edge of the massive estate where my son, Arthur, lives with his wife, Ingrid. 2 years ago, when my wife, my faithful partner in everything, passed away, I couldn't bear to stay in our old apartment. Every chair, every mug, and every creak in the floorboards screamed of my loneliness. The grief was driving me out of my mind. The silence within those four walls felt like it was crushing my ears. That was when Arthur suggested I move in with him. He said, "Pop, sell the place. Why sit in a 3-bedroom apartment all by yourself? Come live near us, breathe some fresh air." And you can help with the grandkids when they come along. I sold the apartment and put the money in a savings account, deciding it would be my safety net for a rainy day or a gift for my future grandchildren. I settled into the cottage, and to make sure I didn't feel like a freeloading guest, I took over the landscaping and the general maintenance of the grounds. My hands were built for work, and idleness felt worse than a prison sentence. I took pride in mowing the lawns, fixing the gazebos, and tending to the trees. To an outsider, it looked like I had found peace and a comfortable retirement next to my successful son. But every month, my heart felt a little heavier. I didn't feel like the father or the head of the family. I felt like a hanger-on, an old servant allowed to live out his days on the master's plantation out of pity. My boy Arthur, who is now 35, had become a completely different person from the one his mother and I raised. He was a high-flying businessman, now dipping his toes into politics, eyeing a seat in the state senate. Everything about him radiated power and control. His marriage to Ingrid, the daughter of a powerful city official, always felt more like a strategic merger than a union of two hearts. They had the perfect facade for social media, beautiful photos, high society galas, and expensive smiles. But behind the closed doors of their mansion, there was a cold emptiness. Their main problem, the one they never spoke about out loud, was their inability to have children. I could see how it was eating Ingrid alive, turning a beautiful woman into a bundle of frayed nerves. And now, in my humble little cottage, Serafina was sitting on my old sofa, holding a child who could level that fragile, dishonest world to the ground. I poured her some hot tea with lemon, pulled a warm quilt from the closet, and, trying to keep my voice steady, asked her to tell me everything. The girl took tiny sips of the tea. Her hands shook so much that the cup rattled against the saucer. She began to speak, and every word fell like a heavy stone dropping into my soul, crushing what was left of my fatherly pride. It turned out that 2 years ago, while Serafina was working in the house, Arthur had set his sights on her. They had a secret affair, while Ingrid was away on business trips or at social events. Serafina, a naive girl from a small town, believed the fairy tale of the rich prince loving the simple girl. She fell for him completely. But when she got pregnant, the fairy tale ended and turned into a nightmare. When Arthur found out about the baby, he simply shoved a stack of cash at her for an abortion and kicked her out, threatening that if she ever opened her mouth, she'd regret being born. "I took the money, Mr. Windcrest. I'm so sorry," she said, sobbing and unable to look me in the eye. "But I couldn't kill the baby. I went to my aunt's place in the country and had him there. But the doctors recently found a heart defect. He needs surgery. Expensive. Urgent surgery. I've never had that kind of money, and I never will. I came to ask Arthur, not for me but for his son, his own son." I listened to her, and I could feel a dull rage simmering inside me. But my mind, always wanting to find an excuse for those I love, whispered, "What if she's lying? What if this is just blackmail?" After all, my Arthur, the boy I took fishing, the boy I taught to build birdhouses, couldn't be this cruel. Or could he? Serafina told me she had met Arthur at the gate an hour earlier as he was coming home. He wouldn't even listen to her. He threatened to set the dogs on her and told her he'd bury her in the woods if she dared to ruin his marriage and his career before the election. The windows of the main house were dark now, and that darkness felt sinister to me. Arthur's Essu wasn't in its usual spot, which confirmed her story. Likely, after seeing her, He couldn't stay home and drove off somewhere to blow off steam. Ingrid wasn't at the estate either. She had been staying at their city penthouse for a few days, undergoing another grueling round of tests at a fertility clinic. The irony was sickening. While the legal wife was torturing herself at clinics, the former mistress was hiding in the guest house with a dying child. I looked at the sleeping baby, his pale face, and the faint blue tint around his lips. I knew I couldn't throw them out into the night. But I also didn't have the right to take her word for it blindly. In this world, people will tell any lie for money. "Stay here until morning," I told Serafina, trying to make my voice sound firm, even though I was trembling inside. "Sleep on the sofa. I'll make up the bed. In the morning, I'll talk to Arthur myself. But listen to me, girl. If you are lying to me, if this is all some act for money, I will call the police myself." She just nodded and hugged the baby tighter. In that gesture, there was so much motherly sacrifice that my doubts began to fade. I went into my small bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned all night, listening to the breathing of my guests through the wall. I thought about what my life and my son's life had become. Could money and power really strip a man of his humanity so completely that he'd be willing to let his own child die just to protect his reputation? Or was Serafina a talented actress looking for a payday? The morning came, gray and somber. It matched my mood. I got up early and made a simple breakfast. I told Serafina to stay quiet and out of sight, not even to go near the windows. After drawing the curtains tight, I walked over to the main house. Arthur was already sitting on the terrace. He was drinking coffee and scrolling through news on his tablet. He was dressed in a silk robe, looking so polished, so calm. A man who owned the world. Looking at him, I felt a mixture of fear for my grandson and a desperate hope that this was all a terrible mistake. I walked up to the terrace, trying to hide the tremor in my hands, and decided to start the conversation from a distance to see his reaction. This was the moment of truth. "Good morning, son," I said as I climbed the steps. "How did you sleep?" Arthur looked up, and for a split second, something anxious flashed in his eyes, but he immediately pulled on his mask of indifferent calm. In that moment, I realized I wasn't looking at the boy I knew, but at a dangerous, calculating stranger. Arthur set his cup down, and the fine porcelain clinked against the glass tabletop like a gunshot in the morning silence. I stared at him, trying to find the boy I taught to hold a hammer and never lie to his mother. He sat there relaxed, legs crossed, but I saw his jaw tighten at the mention of Serafina's name. The question hung in the air, thick and sticky. It felt like even the birds in the garden had gone silent, waiting for his answer. "Serafina?" he repeated, curling his lip as if he'd bitten into a rotten nut. "You mean that former maid? Pop? Really? You're bringing her up now?" Of course I remember her. Turned out to be a real piece of work. He pulled a cigarette from a silver case, flicked his lighter, and took a deep drag, blowing a plume of smoke my way. I stood there, shifting from foot to foot, feeling like a schoolboy in the principal's office, even though it should have been the other way around. "Why do you ask?" Arthur narrowed his eyes at me. There wasn't a spark of warmth in them, only cold, sharp calculation. "Did you see her or something?" "Yeah, I don't know. It just crossed my mind," I lied, trying to sound like a grumpy old man. "They say she was pregnant when she left. Felt bad for the girl. She's so young. Why'd you fire her anyway?" Arthur laughed, but it was a dry, unpleasant sound, like a hacking cough. "Pregnant? Is that what she told you?" He shook his head, flicking ash into a heavy crystal tray. Pop, she's crazy. A kleptomaniac and a liar. Ingrid caught her stealing the silver. We were going to call the cops, but we felt sorry for her. We just kicked her out. And now she's decided to drag our names through the mud, made up some story about an affair, threw herself at me, threatened to tell everyone I harassed her. It's a classic move. Steal first, and when you get caught, blackmail the boss. I looked deep into his eyes, and my heart shriveled with unbearable grief. I knew that look. It was the same look he had as a child when he broke the neighbor's window and blamed it on another boy. There was no righteous anger in his eyes. There was only a slimy fear covered by a thick layer of cynicism. He was lying. He was lying to his father, looking me right in the face without even blinking. The intuition of an old laborer who has seen thousands of people in his life was screaming at me, "Don't believe him." If Serafina were a thief, she wouldn't be sitting there trembling and terrified in my cottage. Con artists are loud and demanding. That girl had nothing but despair in her eyes. So she did come here. Arthur's voice hardened. The metallic tone of a man used to being in charge came out. Did you see her just now? I realized then that if I told the truth, if I admitted Serafina and the baby were with me, he would destroy them. He wouldn't help. He would simply remove the problem the way he removed business competitors. My son, my own flesh and blood, had become a monster who saw people as trash. On to protect an innocent life, I, a man who always taught people to live by their conscience, had to commit a sin. I decided to lie. Yeah, she was hanging around the gates yesterday evening, I said, waving my hand dismissively. Yelling something into the intercom. I went out there with a broom and chased her off. Told her to get lost or I'd set the dogs on her. She ran off toward the highway. I saw the tension instantly drain from Arthur's shoulders. He let out a sigh of relief, and his face returned to its usual mask of smugness. Good job, Pop. That was the right move. He even smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. We don't need that kind of drama, especially not before the election. You know how it is. The opposition is looking for any excuse to sink me, and people like her are just waiting for a chance to grab a piece of the pie. If she shows up again, just call security. Don't even talk to her. He crushed his cigarette into the ashtray with unnecessary force, finished his coffee, and stood up. All right, I've got to get to the campaign office. Business doesn't wait. Keep an eye on the house. Ingrid will be back in a couple of days. He patted me on the shoulder. It was a gesture that used to feel like love, but now felt like a master approving of a loyal dog. He headed for his car. A minute later, the gates opened, and the black SUV sped away, leaving me alone in the ringing silence of that huge alien estate. I stood on the terrace, feeling a coldness take hold of me. That conversation was the point of no return. The bridge between my son and me had collapsed, and my faith in my own life died under the rubble. But I didn't have time to mourn. I looked down at the ashtray. There, among the gray ash, lay the crushed cigarette butt. It was the evidence I needed for the most important question of my life. With a trembling hand, I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket. Carefully, making sure not to touch the filter, I picked up the butt and wrapped it. It felt filthy, disgusting, but it was necessary. Back at the cottage, I found Serafina in the same position she had been in all morning. She hadn't slept. She was just staring into space, rocking the anxiously sleeping baby. Pack your things, honey, I said softly, trying not to scare her. We're going to the city. She jumped up, terrified. Did you tell him? Does he know? No. I shook my head, pulling an old tin box from the top shelf where I kept my emergency savings. He thinks I chased you away. But I need to know the truth. Not your words, Serafina, and not my son's words. I need the truth with an official seal. We're going to get a DNA test. We climbed into my old pickup truck, the one I had managed to keep after selling the apartment. The truck started on the third try, coughing and vibrating as if it were afraid of the road ahead. I drove out through the back service gate to avoid the security at the main entrance, and we headed down the back roads toward the city. Serafina sat in the passenger seat, tiny and fragile, wrapped in my old fleece blanket. I couldn't help but think she was young enough to be my granddaughter. We were silent the whole way, the only sounds being the roar of the engine and the hum of the tires. Occasionally, the baby would whimper in his sleep, making her flinch. In the city, I chose a private lab far away from the neighborhood where Arthur lived and worked. The place was bright, smelling of antiseptic and expensive coffee, a smell I now associated with lies. The girl at the front desk looked at our odd group, an old man in a work jacket and an exhausted girl with a baby, with suspicion. But the cash I laid on the counter made her polite instantly. The procedure was quick and humiliating in its simplicity. Swabs, tubes, signatures. I handed over my son's cigarette butt, explaining it was a sample from the alleged father. The technician didn't ask questions. He just quoted a price for a rush result that made my head spin. It was nearly half of what I had left in the world. I paid it without a second thought. The results will be ready in 3 days, the girl said, tucking the money away. You'll get a notification. Those 3 days were pure torture. We returned to the estate as secretly as we had left. I hid Serafina in the back room of the cottage, strictly forbidding her from turning on lights in the evening or going near the windows. During the day, I worked in the garden with double the intensity, pruning roses, raking leaves, trying to drown my anxiety and physical exhaustion. But my eyes kept drifting toward the windows of the big house. Arthur was coming home late and leaving early, fully immersed in his campaign. He seemed to have forgotten our conversation entirely. I was living a double life. By day, a submissive father and gardener. By night, a conspirator hiding a secret that could blow this comfortable life to pieces. I watched Serafina. She was a good mother, patient, gentle, and caring. She was nothing like the predator Arthur had described. She washed diapers by hand, sang soft lullabies, and carried her son for hours when he struggled to breathe and cried. The baby was getting worse. I saw the blue tint around his mouth deepen, saw how his tiny chest struggled for air. Every day my heart broke a little more. Looking at his suffering, I started thinking that it didn't even matter whose child he was. We couldn't let him die, but to save him, I needed a weapon against Arthur. I needed that paper with the seal. On the third day, toward evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. I was in the garden, raking the last of the fallen leaves under an old oak tree. My hands shook so hard, I dropped the rake. I pulled out the phone, unlocked the screen with fumbling fingers, and opened the file from the lab. The letters danced before my eyes, but I forced myself to focus on the final line. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. The world around me swayed. The leaves under my feet, the gray sky, my son's wealthy home. It all lost its sharpness. It was true. That tiny, gasping boy in my cottage was my grandson, my own flesh and blood. And my son, whom I loved more than life, had truly left them to die. I sat down on a cold garden bench, feeling a single tear roll down my cheek. In that moment, it wasn't just my hope that died. My son, Arthur, died too. The version of him I thought I knew. All that was left was a stranger, with his face and his name. I had to declare war. I sat there looking at the fading garden, knowing there was no going back. I was faced with a terrible choice. Keep up the appearance of a family, or destroy everything to save an innocent soul. I tucked the phone in my pocket and walked toward the cottage. I needed to show the results to Serafina. But when I walked into the room, I saw a sight that turned my blood to ice. Serafina was pacing the room, with the baby in her arms, but the boy wasn't crying. He was wheezing, gasping for air, and his face was a terrifying shade of blue. "Mr. Windcrest," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "He's not breathing. Help him!" There was no more time for thinking. The DNA test in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole in my leg. But right now, nothing mattered but being fast enough. I grabbed the truck keys. "Get in the car!" I barked, no longer caring about secrecy. "The hospital. Now!" We ran out of the cottage. I didn't even bother to lock the door. Serafina jumped into the passenger seat. I slammed it into gear, and the old truck roared as we peeled out. We sped down the driveway toward the main gate, driving over lawns and through bushes. The gates were in sight, but suddenly, a black silhouette blocked our path. It was Arthur. He had just returned and was standing by his SUV, blocking the exit. When he saw my truck racing toward him with Serafina in the front seat, his face changed. He realized I had lied to him. I slammed on the brakes inches from his car. Dust billowed up in a cloud. Arthur ran toward us, his face twisted with rage. He ripped open the driver's door. "You!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You said you chased her off. You lied to me, Pop. You lied to me." He didn't look at the baby, who was dying in his mother's arms just a foot away. He only looked at me, and in his eyes I saw nothing but fear for his own skin. "Get out of the way, Arthur," I yelled back, feeling a wild determination rise in me. "The baby is dying. He needs the ER. He's your son." "What damn son?" he roared, reaching in to try and pull the keys from the ignition. "That brat is nothing to me. Do you understand what you're doing? The election is tomorrow. If someone sees you, you're not going anywhere." And then I did something I had never done in my life. I shoved him, my grown, powerful son, with such force that he flew back against the side of his SUV. "I have the DNA test," I screamed in his face. 99%, Arthur. This is your son, and I'm going to save him even if I have to drive right over you." He froze, stunned by my words. The mention of the DNA hit him harder than the shove. While he was gasping for air, I slammed the door, floored it, and drove around him over the lawn, crushing the expensive rose bushes I had planted myself. In the rearview mirror, I saw him screaming and running toward his car. The chase was on, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't stopping. The old pickup truck wailed like a wounded animal, pushing its worn engine to the limit as we tore down the highway toward the city lights. I gripped the wheel and prayed to every god I knew, just hoping we'd make it, just hoping that tiny heart wouldn't stop. Next to me, Serafina was as white as a sheet, whispering incoherent prayers while clutching her son. Her whisper, filled with primal terror, was louder than the wind rushing through the cracked window. In the mirror, I saw the headlights of the black SUV. It would get close, then fall back, like a predator, stalking its prey. Arthur didn't dare ram us on the busy road. Perhaps a shred of caution was still fighting his rage, or maybe he was just waiting for a moment to solve the problem without witnesses. When we pulled into the hospital parking lot, I didn't even wait for the truck to stop. I jumped out and ran toward the emergency room doors, cradling the bundle that felt frighteningly light. Serafina was right behind me, stumbling with every step. Her face was soaked with tears. Inside, the smell of bleach and medicine hit us. That specific hospital smell always makes my knees weak. The nurse at the desk looked up slowly, ready to ask for insurance and ID. But when she saw the baby's blue face, her expression changed instantly. She hit a red button. "Respiratory arrest in Bay 1. Stat!" she shouted into the intercom. That shout was the first glimmer of hope I had felt all night. The doctors moved like a well-oiled machine. They snatched the baby from my arms, laid him on a gurney, and disappeared through the white swinging doors where Serafina and I couldn't follow. We were left in the cold, echoing hallway, stunned by the sudden silence. I sank into a hard plastic chair, feeling the adrenaline fade, replaced by a leaden exhaustion and a dull ache in my back. Serafina slid down the wall and huddled on the floor, a tiny ball of grief. I wanted to go to her, to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. Behind those walls, doctors were fighting for my grandson's life, while his own father wished him dead. 30 minutes later, a doctor came out, a tall, hunched man with tired eyes who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He pulled off his mask and looked at us with that professional sympathy doctors develop over years of hard practice. "He's in critical condition, but he's stable," he said. Those words loosened the vice around my heart. "We have him on a ventilator. The crisis has passed for now, but he needs urgent valve surgery. You understand this is expensive? The waiting list for a grant is long, and we don't have time." I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and took out the debit card containing the last of the money from the sale of my apartment. Everything that hadn't gone toward the DNA test. "Do whatever you have to do, doctor," I said firmly, handing him the card. "Take every penny. If it's not enough, I'll find more. I'll sell the truck, a kidney, whatever it takes. Just save him." The doctor nodded and went to process the paperwork. I sat back down, feeling a strange emptiness in my pocket and my soul. I had just given away everything I had, my entire retirement fund, but I didn't regret it for a single second. How could paper be worth more than a person's breath? And then he appeared at the end of the hall. Arthur walked fast and confident. His expensive shoes clicked against the tile floor, drawing the attention of the few patients and staff nearby. He looked out of place here. In his flawless Italian suit and the gold watch on his wrist, he looked like a visitor from another planet, the world of success and power where there is no room for pain or death. But I saw how his eyes darted around, how he nervously adjusted his cuffs. He didn't come as a father hearing about his son's tragedy. He came as a crisis manager to handle a messy situation that threatened his election project. Serafina saw him and pressed herself against the wall, as if trying to disappear into the paint. I stayed seated, watching my son approach with a heavy, unblinking gaze. Arthur stopped 2 feet from me, looked around to make sure no one was listening, and spoke in a low whisper. But there was so much venom in that whisper, it could have poisoned the whole city. "So the hero is satisfied?" he hissed through his teeth, not even glancing toward the ICU. "Put on quite a show, didn't you? Do you have any idea what you've done? By tomorrow morning, reporters could sniff out that I was here. You want to destroy everything I have worked years for." I stared at him in silence, and I felt a chill of fear. Not from his threats, but from how deep the abyss was that he had fallen into. This wasn't a man standing before me. It was a calculator, weighing risks and losses, having completely discarded his conscience. Your son is in there, Arthur, I said softly, pointing to the closed doors. He's having surgery. He almost died. And you don't even care. Arthur winced, as if he had a toothache, and pulled a thick envelope from his inner jacket pocket with a nervous flick. Stop with the pity play, Pop. It doesn't work. He tossed the envelope onto my lap. There's enough money in there, enough to buy a house in the middle of nowhere in another state. Take the girl, take the kid, and vanish. Tonight. I looked at the envelope sitting on my old, worn-out jeans, and I felt a wave of cold fury. He wanted to pay us off. He wanted to buy his child's life and my conscience the same way he bought new cars or campaign ads. My hand slowly reached for my jacket pocket where my phone was. I felt for the record button on the voice memo app, and, looking my son straight in the eye, I secretly pressed it. You're offering me money to take your sick son to some backwoods town and let him die there? I asked loudly and clearly, making sure every word was caught. You're disowning him? Arthur let out an irritated sigh, leaned down close to me, and hissed, I'm not just offering, I'm ordering. I don't need problems. If this kid lives and word gets out that he's mine, I'm finished. So, yeah, let him vanish. If he dies, I don't care. It'll be easier for everyone that way. Take the money and get out before I change my mind and have you all committed to a psych ward. I have enough connections to have you declared incompetent. You know me. Every word he spoke was like a nail being driven into the coffin of our relationship. If he dies, I don't care. I listened, and I knew there was no going back. This was the end. I had recorded it all. Every threat, every offer, every drop of his inhumanity. Fine, Arthur, I said, standing up and picking up the envelope. Not to accept it, but to throw it in his face. I hear you. In that moment, the elevator doors at the end of the hall opened, and Ingrid stepped out. She looked lost and worried, nothing like the Iron Lady we were used to seeing. It turned out that someone on the staff, recognizing Arthur's last name, had called his wife thinking it was her child in trouble. Or maybe she had used her own connections to find her husband. She saw us, me holding the envelope, Serafina huddled in the corner, and Arthur, whose face was twisted with malice. Arthur turned around, and for a second his mask slipped, revealing pure panic. He rushed toward her, instantly switching his expression to one of grief and concern, trying to take control of the narrative. Ingrid, honey, he exclaimed, reaching out to her. Can you believe this? Pop has completely lost his mind. He picked up some drifters, brought them here, and is demanding I pay for their treatment. I'm trying to explain to him that we aren't a charity foundation. I stood there and watched this one-man theater, clutching the phone with the recording. In a few seconds, his world was going to collapse. It pained me to do it, because I was destroying my own son's life. But looking at the closed doors of the ICU, I knew I had no other choice. Truth was the only weapon I had left against the monster I had raised. I took a step toward my daughter-in-law. Arthur kept rambling, waving his hands, trying to build a wall of lies between us and Ingrid. But his voice was hitting high, squeaky notes, betraying the panic of a trapped animal. He spoke of my senile dementia, of blackmailers, of political enemies who had allegedly sent this girl to smear his name before the election. I looked at him and didn't see a successful politician. I saw a scared, naughty little boy who had broken a vase and was trying to blame it on the cat, not realizing the shards were already cutting into his own feet. It was physically painful to watch this fall, But the pity in me had burned out back on the highway when he blocked the path of a dying child. I didn't argue with him. I didn't yell or try to justify myself, because the truth doesn't need loud words. It weighs more than any scream. I simply stepped past my son as if he were thin air and approached Ingrid. She stood there, pale and straight as a wire, her eyes, usually cold and calm, now swimming with anxiety and confusion. She looked from her husband to me, then to Serafina cowering in the corner. Her woman's intuition was already piecing together the puzzle, but her mind refused to believe such a horrific picture. "Ingrid, listen to me," I said softly, looking her in the eye, and handed her the crumpled envelope with the lab's logo. "Arthur talks a lot. The paper speaks more clearly. These are the DNA results." Arthur lunged, trying to snatch the envelope from my hand, but Ingrid, showing a strength unexpected for her slender frame, sharply threw out her hand, stopping her husband with one commanding gesture. "Don't you dare!" she snapped, in a frigid tone that sent shivers down even my spine. "I want to know what is going on here." She took the envelope, slowly and with terrifying precision, tore the edge, and pulled out the folded sheet of paper. Silence fell over the hallway, broken only by the distant beep of medical equipment and Arthur's heavy breathing. I saw her eyes race across the lines, saw her pupils dilate when she reached the final number, and watched the color slowly drain from her face, leaving it white as a marble mask. She slowly raised her eyes to her husband, and in that look there was so much pain and contempt that Arthur instinctively backed away. 99.9? She asked in a whisper that sounded louder than a scream. "Is it true, Arthur? You have a son?" Arthur started stammering about mistake, about forged documents, about how I had set it all up. But I didn't give him a chance to sing his lying song again. I pulled out my phone, found the file, and hit play. "Now listen to what your husband, this perfect family man, offered me 5 minutes ago when he found out his child needed surgery." From the phone's speaker, amplified by the hospital echo, came Arthur's voice. Spiteful, cynical, real. "Let him die. It'll be easier for everyone. I'll give you money. Take them to the woods or some village. Take the money and get out." Every word dropped into the silence of the hallway, like a stone into water, sending out ripples of irreversible destruction. Ingrid listened, and her face turned to stone with every passing second. I knew that for her, a woman who had spent years praying to heaven for a child and going through the hell of endless procedures, those words about the death of a baby were worse than the affair itself. An affair is a betrayal of a wife, but wishing death upon your own child is a betrayal of humanity itself. Take a second to think. Did I do the right thing by playing that recording and destroying my son's family for good? Or should I have stayed quiet to keep up the appearance of peace? When the recording ended, Ingrid slowly lowered the hand holding the envelope. She was no longer looking at Arthur. She turned to me and, in a quiet but firm voice, asked, "Show him to me." I nodded and led her to the large observation window of the ICU bay. There, in the sterile whiteness, tangled in tubes and wires, lay the tiny boy. His chest rose rhythmically with the machine's help, and his face, freed from the oxygen mask, was calm and defenseless. And now, in the bright light of the medical lamps, the resemblance was impossible to deny. It was a miniature Arthur, the same boy I had carried on my shoulders 30 years ago. The same shape of the eyes, the same stubborn chin. You can't hide genetics behind money. You can't cover it with lies. Ingrid pressed her palm against the cold glass. I saw her fingers, with their perfect manicure, tremble. I saw a single tear roll down her cheek, washing away a layer of expensive makeup. She was looking at another woman's son, born from her husband's betrayal, but she saw in him the miracle that had been denied to her. In that moment, the hurt of a cheated wife was battling the unspent love of a mother. I prayed that love would win. Behind our backs, Arthur tried to make one last desperate attempt to save the situation. Ingrid, listen. This is just emotions, Sein. He approached her, trying to put a hand on her shoulder. We'll handle this. I'll fix it. It was just a mistake from my youth. A fluke. We'll hire lawyers, pay them off, and they'll disappear. Ingrid spun around, shaking off his hand as if it were a venomous snake. Her eyes were dry and terrifying in their resolve. A fluke? She repeated, her voice ringing like a taut wire. A living human being is a fluke? You wanted him to die, Arthur? You offered money for the death of your son. You aren't a man. You aren't even an animal, because animals protect their young. You are a void. Ingrid, don't start. I have an election, he wailed, realizing the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. To hell with your election, she roared, making the nurse at the station flinch. You are bankrupt, Arthur, in every sense. You didn't betray me when you slept with the maid. You betrayed us all when you decided to kill this boy for your career. Get out! What? Arthur stammered, unable to believe his ears. This is my house, too. No. Ingrid shook her head, and the steel of a powerful politician's daughter rang in her voice. The house is in my name. My father funds your company. The car you drove here was bought by me. You have nothing of your own except your malice. I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning. And if you ever try to come near me, Elijah, or this child, I will destroy you. I have the connections, and you know it. Arthur stood in the middle of the hallway, crushed, humiliated, stripped of everything in a single heartbeat. He looked from me to Ingrid, then to the ICU window. In his eyes, I saw no repentance, only a burning hatred for the world, because his perfect plan had failed. He spat on the floor, cursed, and walked toward the exit without looking back. We all heard the heavy thud of the entrance door. That sound was the final period on the story of his old life. In the silence that followed, Ingrid took a deep breath, as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She turned back to the window. Mr. Windcrest, she said softly, not taking her eyes off the baby. Go to the desk and tell them to put the bill in my name. I will pay for the surgery and the rehabilitation. I looked at her in shock. Ingrid, you don't have to. I know whose child this is, she interrupted, bitterness in her voice. It's not his fault his father is a coward. And that girl, Serafina, it's not her fault she believed him. No one deserves to die for someone else's ambition. Consider this my contribution to justice, or the price of having my eyes opened. She pulled out her phone, made a call, and in short, business-like sentences, began giving orders about transferring funds and bringing in the best specialists. I stepped over to Serafina, who had been sitting on the floor this whole time, not daring to look up. Get up, honey, I said, helping her to her feet. It's going to be okay. We haven't been abandoned. That evening, I realized something important. Sometimes, strangers turn out to be closer and more human than your own flesh and blood. Ingrid, whom I had judged as a cold socialite, turned out to be a woman with a huge, wounded heart. And my son had chosen his path. And it was a path to nowhere. The doctors began preparing the boy for surgery. Serafina and I stayed to wait in the hall. Ingrid left, saying she had a divorce and an eviction to handle. Before she left, she walked up to me and, for the first time in all the years I'd known her, she hugged me. It was awkward and quick, but it was real. "Thank you, Elijah," she whispered. "For the truth, it's bitter, but it's better than living a lie." I was left alone with my thoughts and the steady hum of the hospital lights. I had won. I saved my grandson. I revealed the truth. But why did my soul feel so unbearably heavy? It was as if I had buried a part of myself along with my son's reputation. The night in the hospital dragged on forever. I sat in an uncomfortable chair, listening to the clock tick away, the seconds that decided my grandson's fate. Serafina eventually fell asleep, curled up on a narrow bench. Her strength had run out. I couldn't close my eyes. My mind kept replaying Arthur's exit. That final look of pure hatred burned me from the inside. Was I to blame for him becoming that way? Where is the line where a small lie turns into a great malice? By morning, the surgeon came out. His green scrubs were wrinkled, his face gray with fatigue, but his eyes shone with a quiet satisfaction. He sat down next to me and let out a long breath. "He's alive, Mr. Wincrest," he said. Those 4 words were the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The heart is pumping. The valve is working. The boy is a fighter. He's got a grip on life. The worst is over. I closed my eyes, feeling the invisible hand that had been clutching my throat finally let go. I wanted to say something, to thank him, but only a hoarse, ragged sob came out. The doctor patted my shoulder understandingly and walked away. I sat there, swallowing tears of relief. Justice is a rare guest in this life. But today it had stopped by this sterile hallway. A few days later, Ingrid sent a car for us. She didn't come herself. Likely, the fallout with Arthur and her father required all her attention. But she made sure Serafina and the baby were moved to the best private recovery room. I went back to the estate to pack my things. I had nothing left to do in that luxury tomb, where every rose bush reminded me of my son's betrayal. The estate greeted me with an eerie silence. The gates were wide open, the security was gone, and moving trucks were at the front door, taking out expensive leather sofas and paintings. Ingrid was moving fast, just as she promised. She was scrubbing her life clean of anything that reminded her of Arthur. I went into the cottage that had been my home for 2 years and felt a wave of sadness. It smelled of dried herbs and old books. I pulled my worn suitcase from under the bed and started packing. A change of clothes, an old photo album, my tools. Suddenly, the door burst open. It was Arthur. He looked terrible. His jacket was wrinkled, his shirt unbuttoned, his eyes bloodshot. He smelled of expensive cognac mixed with pure desperation. He stood there, swaying, looking at me as if I were his sworn enemy. "Packing up. Are you Judas?" he croaked, barely standing. "Where to now? Going to be a hanger-on for the ex-wife? Or did you hire yourself out as a nanny for that bastard?" I straightened up, holding an old photo of my wife. I wasn't afraid. I just felt an infinite pity for this man who had lost everything, but still understood nothing. "You did this to yourself, Arthur," I said calmly. "You set this house on fire when you decided money mattered more than your soul. I just didn't let you burn the child with it." Arthur punched the doorframe, cracking the wood. "I don't give a damn about that kid," he roared. "Because of your holiness, everyone turned their back on me. My father-in-law blocked my accounts. The party kicked me out. Ingrid filed for divorce and threw me on the street. Do you get what you've done? You destroyed my future. I had a chance to be someone important, and now I'm nothing." I walked up to him, and he instinctively flinched, seeing a strength in my eyes as he never had. "You can't build a future on bones, son," I said softly. "You say you're nothing now?" "No, you were nothing the whole time. You were just wearing an expensive mask. Now the mask is off. You're alone with your ego, and that is the worst punishment there is." Arthur laughed, a dry, broken laugh of a man on the edge of the abyss. "Talk pretty, Pop, just like a movie. But in the real world, your truth doesn't feed you or keep you warm. We'll see how you sing when your pennies run out, and you're in a nursing home with that maid. You'll all die in poverty. But me? I'll rise again. You'll see." He turned and stormed out of the cottage, nearly knocking over Ingrid as she was walking up. She watched him go, with a heavy gaze, and stepped inside, closing the door tight. She was carrying a folder of documents. "Mr. Windcrest, I'm sorry you had to hear that," she said, sitting on a stool. "Arthur has lost all touch with reality. He's trying to threaten my father, not realizing he's finished. I came to tell you the divorce is underway. He won't get a cent." "Ingrid, you didn't come here just for that," I noted, seeing her hesitation. "Is something wrong with the boy?" No, the baby is fine." She smiled weakly. "I just came from the hospital. Serafina is doing great, you know. I've thought about it a lot. I'll never be able to have children. The doctors were final about it. And that boy, he really is the image of Arthur. It's strange to say, but I feel an unexplainable draw to him. Like, he's the only living real thing left from that rotten marriage." I stayed silent, letting her speak. I realized then that Ingrid's tragedy was as big as mine. She had built her life on a lie, hoping for a miracle. And when the miracle happened, it was bitter and illegitimate. But that shared grief made us allies. "I want to help," she continued, opening the folder. "My family owns a small house on the outskirts of town, a quiet place. It has a good garden, fresh air, and a clinic nearby. I've put the deed in your name. Please, don't say no. This isn't a handout. I just want to know that this child has a home, and that you'll be there." I looked at the papers, then at Ingrid. In her eyes, there was a plea. She wasn't just giving me a house. She was seeking salvation for her own soul, trying to fix the evil her husband had done. "Thank you, Ingrid," I said, feeling my heart lighten a little. "I'll accept it on one condition. You have to visit us. That boy needs to know that in this world, there is not just cruelty, but mercy too." She nodded, and tears sparkled on her lashes. In that moment, the gap of social class between us vanished. We were just two people who had lost their footing and were trying to build a raft from the wreckage of broken hopes. The first few weeks after that night were like a fever dream. By while, I was with Serafina in the ward. By night, I returned to the empty estate. When the boy was finally discharged, we moved to the little house in the country. I remember that first spring by the smell of fresh sawdust and earth. I'd wake up at dawn, walk onto the porch, and breathe in the pine air. My hands, hungry for real work, begged for something to do. I fixed the fence, re-roofed the shed, and cleared the brush for a new garden. Physical labor is the best medicine for a scarred soul. When you drive a nail into a board or plant an apple tree, the bad thoughts retreat. Life goes on, no matter what. Marcus, that's what we named the boy, grew up right before my eyes. His heart, wounded at birth, grew stronger every day. By the time he was 2, he was already helping me in the garden. He'd carry a tiny bucket of water, scowl seriously as he watched me prune branches, and ask endless questions. I saw Arthur's features in him, but I tried to see not the shadow of the past, but the light of the future. Ingrid visited every weekend. She brought toys and books, but I knew she needed these trips more than we did. In our simple life, in the smell of the pancakes Serafina made, in the sound of a child's laughter on the lawn, she found the warmth no amount of money could buy. She officially divorced Arthur, and, from what I heard, her father helped erase him from every business circle. Arthur vanished. Some said that they saw him in the city with shady types. Others said he went abroad. For us, he didn't exist anymore. He was a ghost, a bitter memory we tried not to disturb. One evening, when Marcus turned 4, we were sitting on the porch. Ingrid was reading him a story, and Serafina and I were drinking tea. Marcus suddenly looked up and asked, "Grandpa, why do all the kids have daddies and I don't?" A silence fell so heavy you could hear a moth hitting the lamp. Serafina turned pale. Ingrid froze. I felt the familiar lump in my throat. It was the question I had feared most. What do you tell a child? The truth, that his father was a man who wouldn't pay to save him, or a lie about a hero pilot who died in the clouds? I pulled my grandson close, stroked his head, and said the words I had carried in my heart for years. You see, Marcus, there are all kinds of daddies. There are the ones who stay, and then there are the ones who got lost in a big, cold desert. Your daddy got lost. He wanted to find gold so badly that he forgot the way home. But you have us. You have your mom. You have Aunt Ingrid. And you have me. And we will never, do you hear me? Never leave you. Marcus hugged me with his tiny arms, and I felt his heart beating steady and strong. He understood it in his own way, and a minute later he was laughing again, showing Ingrid a dragon in the book. I looked at the setting sun and I realized this was my redemption. Not in punishing my son, not in destroying his career, but in making sure this boy grew up different, in making sure he knew the value of love, not the price of things. I've lived a long life. I made a lot of mistakes, and for a long time, I believed that my son's success was the measure of my worth as a father. But life taught me a brutal lesson. Now, in the twilight of my days, I realized the most important inheritance we can leave isn't property or bank accounts. It's the people we taught how to love. I lost a successful businessman, but I gained a chance to raise a real man. If I had to walk this path again, I wouldn't change a single step, even knowing the price I'd have to pay. My life now is quiet and simple. I'm still a gardener, but now I'm growing more than just roses and apple trees. I'm growing my grandson's soul. And when I sit on the porch at night, listening to the silence of the woods, I feel peace. The kind of peace that only comes from a clear conscience. You can't erase the mistakes of the past, but you can redeem them with the future. Never forget, it's never too late to start over, even when it feels like the world has collapsed. Please, don't wait until tomorrow to say, "I love you," or "I forgive you." Hug your loved ones today, because tomorrow might be too late. Take care of each other, and remember that humanity is the most precious thing we have. I'm really glad you're here, and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, two of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch next.